Okay.
I had a question to kick us off. You guys talked about this a little bit, but I talked with my uncle recently about parenting, and he was a pastor for many years. And he told me, he made it so clear. He said, from 0 to 1.5, your goal is just keep your kid alive, build
Right.
trust. Keep your kid alive, build
That's
trust.
right.
And then from 1.5 to 5, the goal is teach them to respect authority.
Yes.
Really?
And,
That's
yeah,
great.
I was curious, if would you agree with those two things, and then what would the next phase be?
It's, I would say, almost say it's never too early to help them learn a healthy view of authority. But that's probably really, really wise to 1.5 years or just surviving. What was after that? Remember?
From 1.5 to 5 was teach them to respect authority, and then he didn't tell me the next phase. So I was curious if you guys could just name what's next.
Pray a lot.
Yeah.
Well, you move in, they start having a little bit more decision-making
Yeah.
opportunities. Again, not big major, but you want them to start learning to make decisions and learning the consequences of them, for good consequences as well as bad. I would say, from 5 from then on, but you start with small stuff and yeah.
I think too, you're learning to relate to other people.
Yeah.
We talked a lot I grew up in a be nice culture. Everything's be nice till they cross you, and then underneath the surface, then you really slime them, right? We didn't say be nice. We said choose to be kind, and remember that you don't have to like them. I said this a lot. You don't have to like that person, but you do have to remember that this is a person that God loves. And so
Treat them that way.
that's starting about 5 for the rest of their lives. This is what you're doing. Giving them opportunities to make choices is not the most efficient way, right? It is not efficient to let your child choose between if they want ponytails or a fountain or whatever. But how many of you grew up like I did in an authoritarian household? So the first decision you were ever allowed to make was, what am I going to major in college? That is quite a leap, right? Your whole rest of your life, all you're doing is making decisions, like millions of them. So help your child learn to make decisions.
Go ahead, Emma.
I see.
I'm trying to figure out how to word this, but I feel like I've heard that it's our responsibility to give our kids a Christian education. But you said you sent your kids to public school. What was that conversation like? Was it year by year? Like, I guess, how did you decide to make that?
Yeah, really good question. So let me start with this strong belief of ours is that you, before the Lord, are the one responsible for your child. And we have watched too quickly other people tell you what you should do with your children. That's not their responsibility, that's your responsibility. And so you need to decide before the Lord and with the Lord what is best for your children. And kind of the quick way to say it is and you can put in the details, but we prayed and asked the Lord after kindergarten. She reminded me of this. After kindergarten, after Audrey was in kindergarten, at the end of Audrey went into kindergarten knowing how to read. And at the end of kindergarten, we found out her kindergarten teacher didn't know she could read at all. And we're like, what have we been doing? And so we almost at that point said, we're going to homeschool. But we spent a good amount of time praying and fasting about that. And for both of us, we felt like the Lord said, no, we want you to keep them there for now. But from there, for every child, every year, we tried to evaluate what was going to be best for them. And we didn't assume it was what was good for one was good for the other. We tried to do that every year. Now, I think there's a lot, if you're going to, we wanted to do public school because we wanted them to learn to live in the world and we wanted to be a part, but we were also trying to pay attention to, were they able, how influenced were they by the world? And each child was influenced differently. So that's why a year at a time, depends on the school system, depends on teachers. There's a lot of factors. We did have kids moved from one teacher to another sometimes. That was not working. But we would never say, you should always do it this way or that way. Another principle we would say, though, is do everything you can not to make the decisions of your, based on fear. The fear of what if might happen. We can't do that. We want our kids to live for Christ in a world that doesn't know him. So one way or another, we've got to help them find that. And that might be through homeschooling, or it might be through a Christian school, or it might be. But we still believe we are the number one ones responsible for teaching our children. Is that?
I take exception, that idea about homeschooling started a few years before we became parents. And the sentiment was, if you don't homeschool your children, you might as well basically reserve them a cell in the penitentiary, and because they're gonna make sacrifices to Satan and all of this stuff. So everybody went, I don't want that. I'm going to homeschool my children. And at that time, I was saying, well, if we take all the Christians out of public school, okay. So that's kind of, then, we've abandoned the city. Okay. That was then. I had kids, special children, exceptional. And then I'm like, I'm not going to sacrifice my child to these heathen people. Then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, homeschool sounds pretty good. But what we found is that public school is a one-size-fits-all experience. And so if your kids are over here or over here on the extremes, there's going to be challenges that you're going to have to figure out. And we did. Our kids were, I can't remember which side you're on, but whichever's the exceptional end, that's where they were. So we had to do some extra things. And we did. We prayed and fasted because we felt like when the kids were kindergarten first, and we both came out with a sense of call that at this time we leave them in. And it was, for me, an act of faith. Mine came out at 1 Samuel 1, where Hannah took her child to the temple. And so the Lord basically said to me that, you make sure that you're your child's teacher, and I will take care of everything else. Okay, that's where that came from. Now, later on, another thing happened, and we came to that decision again. And that time, our child came to us and said, as a 12-year-old, the Lord has told me I should stay. Okay.
Well, she said, Audrey had such a bad 6th grade experience. We were thinking, it's time. And then she said, give me 2 weeks. Let's give it 2 weeks. And if it's not working, let's do homeschool. And we're like, well, that's pretty reasonable. And she thrived and said, so we're glad we took that approach, but boy, we were close.
So I would say, take it serious. If it's serious, take it seriously. Seek God, pray, fast, find the answer. Now, I'm not saying that you should automatically put your kid in public school. I would have said that before I was married and had no children. But, these are your treasures. So whatever you do, don't do it in fear. Do it in faith. Do it as a sense of call, because that's what's going to sustain you either way. But if you're just so terrified that your little petunia is going to wilt, so I better keep them home, those are the kids that 20 years later, you go, you were homeschooled, weren't you? So we have friends who, in the same year, they had a kid in public school and a kid in private school. We could never do private school because we couldn't afford it. But
Because that was what was best for that child that year.
that year.
So,
I just a quick follow-up, have you guys in ministry noticed, like, has the world changed to a point where you would make that decision differently in 2025 than in the past?
It would be harder to do public school based on where we were in Portland anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And the agenda, you know, and a lot of the agenda toward gender fluidity and things, you've got to pay attention to that and see what's happening in your school district and in your school and find out what's actually being taught. And
In the principle of pay attention, you pay attention. Now, what I didn't say is that because I was an at-home mom, because my kids were in public school, I was there volunteering 2 or 3 days a week. So I knew what was going on in school. I knew what the conversations were, and because we had built trust with my children, when there was an issue about I'm sorry that I have to even say this word in this baby's room, in this baby's presence, but when there's an issue of a pedophiliac stepfather, we had to have conversations. It broke my heart that we had to have conversations. But we were in an era of time when my kids came to us for information so we could talk. When somebody's parents divorced, when somebody died, we had these conversations. When it was time for sex ed, we said, we want to know what the other kids are talking about, and we want to arm you so that you know what to talk about. Does that make sense? Because those things are going on in the world. I promise you, if you go to a grocery store and the magazines are in the thing by the checkout, your kids are gonna be exposed. If you have a television, your kids are gonna be exposed. So, you know, anyway, so, yes, and that is why we say, with a sense of call to whatever you choose. A
But
sense
yes,
of call.
things have changed in the last 25 years, 30 years.
I mean, we don't have kids yet, but I'm just curious. How do you balance like cherishing the stage of life your kids are in, but also actively like kind of plan for their future, I guess? How can you stay content like with the stage they're in, but also like as a good shepherd kind of have the eyes to see ahead and kind of plan for them? I guess.
It's a great question. I loved every stage they were in, and I felt regret every time they grew out of it. Stop
is-
it, go back.
Which is hilarious, because we were terrified of the whole thing before it started. We were terrified.
I think it's really possible to do that, though, because you're enjoying them, but you also are looking at them as people. And you're watching what's happening in them. And you do think about how do we prepare them for what's next. And you understand that that's also a way of loving them. So that's what helps you do that, you know. This is one of the ways I love them is preparing them for what's next, preparing them for the future. If you're able to put money in savings for college, it's hard to imagine that when they're preschoolers, but you're preparing them for that. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we could do that, whether it's how to act or whether it's financial, but I'm not answering the how, but it's such a process. We don't ever want to let our love of now keep us from tomorrow, because we can't stop that. We don't want to stop that.
How did you, the goal of parenting being raising responsible, healthy adults, and Lord willing, that follow
Yeah.
Christ and
Yeah.
love Him. So how did you guys have that, I guess, conversation with your kids? Like you're raising them in this Christian environment and in the church. And at what point did you get to, I guess, Lord willing, when they decide that they want to follow Christ and things like that, like how did you guys navigate? Oh, they're just repeating what we taught them, which is good, or like, oh, this is an actual hard change, and like the Lord is actually working in their lives.
Yeah, everyone was different, as we would expect. I guess that would be the case. Both Audrey Amy and Audrey came very young to the Lord, younger than we were comfortable with. So we said, let's just watch for a while. Amy was like 4 or 5,
4, I think.
and so let's just watch. There's no hurry. But she sure seemed like there was a change, the best you can tell at that. Audrey, I think, was 6 on Easter Sunday, and said, I asked Jesus into my heart today. That is wonderful. Can I be baptized? Well, let's wait just a little bit. And so we waited 2 years. And she was baptized, I think, on Easter like 2 years later or something like that. Because no hurry. Let's watch and see. And we just kept talking. Lane was resistant. It wasn't until he was in middle school, really, that he made a decision. And made a decision at Vacation Bible School when he was young, but really in middle school. He's always been our one that struggled the most. And right now he's not following the Lord. And that's, as you can imagine, incredibly painful for us. We are very close, and I'm thankful for that. I would say we're following the kind of the model of the prodigal son, who the father just kept watching. And when he came, he received him now. And so we look at how do we love him, and that seems to be going well. But he personally, it was always such a private person. Being a pastor's son was just hard for him. And so he's just always had some questions, But he did make those decisions, and so we're still watching and praying and that kind of thing. But we didn't, because it happened like that, there was never us having a conversation of necessarily presenting the gospel to them and asking them to. We're sort of keeping up. But it's not that it would be wrong to do that. It's just you got to be sensitive to where each child is.
My fear, I gave my life to Jesus when I was very young. I was 5. And that presented some things. Basically, I ended up being quite the little Pharisee as I grew up. And it was the painful undoing of the Phariseeism that is my life story. I said to the Lord, I don't want my children to be Pharisees. I want them to know you and not a set of rules. And it's confusing because when you're little, you've got to civilize them, right? And so you've got to tell them some things. And they go, and in church they're saying you should do this. And so it's very confusing to ask of a child, ask of a heathen, which your children are, ask of your little heathen to try to behave like Christians apart from the Holy Spirit, which is the only way you can really be a Christian, right? So it's a little confusing. Am I an overthinker, do you think? Yes, I am. But so in all of that, we just want to be really intentional about just saying the truth, to just try to say the truth, to own when we blow it. I think that's really an important thing. And to rejoice in the forgiveness of Jesus at all opportunities. And in the normalization of talking, teaching them how to have a quiet time, teaching those things after they come to faith. Again, we're not going to have an hour-long DT at the age of even 12. But, little bits at a time.
We are the primary disciplers
Yeah.
of our children until they leave the home. So did that answer that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that
How did your family worship time change as your kids entered into high school and were able to be more interactive and deep thinkers? Was it still at breakfast time, or how did it change?
Yeah, that's where we had to do it. And the older once they got into probably mid-high school, we probably didn't do it anymore. And that was not necessarily intentional. It was partly because our son was a baseball player. And from 3 till 8 every night he was at baseball practice and that kind of thing. And so, but you're right, the discussions did get much better, and that's continued even till now. Some of the great discussions we have are about Scripture or about the Lord, that even with, including Lane, he's involved in that. But so you might remember better than I do what we did.
I was gonna say, there's an Old Testament principle on tithing, which is God owns the first 10%. And then the New Testament is that we are steward and God owns everything. Family worship time kind of evolved in the same way. At first, there were concentrated times, but as times changed, just like when you have 2 babies, your devotional times are completely different than they were when you were a single person and could lounge for hours if you wanted to. Okay, it's different. You're like reading the Bible while you stir, and you're talking to God while you're changing diapers. Okay, same thing with our family worship. It kind of had to morph. We had one kid who was at school at 7 a.m. doing 3, whatever you call that, 0 period. And then we had one kid who worked. And so it became conversant at that point, if that makes sense. It became more New Testament, everything.
All
was
of life, but
worship.
when we did have a meal, that was
Yeah.
the most natural time to do it.
Because it was normal for us to talk about the Lord. We just did.
I want to ask this question on behalf of my wife. She asked, this isn't maybe directly related to parenting, but I think I'd love to hear what you have to say about this with kids too. But do you have any tips for navigating suffering, grief, or unexpected trials with your spouse and then maybe with your kids as well?
Yep. Our dads died 3 months apart from each other. We've experienced a lot of death in both as in ministry and then in our families. And one thing I would say about grief is I believe grief is God's gift to us, but it's really hard. I think it's God's gift to us to help us heal emotionally, but it kind of has a mind of its own, and we don't get to decide when we grieve and when we don't. And so part of what we've had to do and learned to do is give each other room to grieve and to recognize that grief looks different, both with different people and at different times. And really try to watch our children to see, do they start acting out differently? That could just be a sign of they're in pain, emotional pain. Or do they get rebellious for a while? So there's a lot of watching and honestly a lot of freedom to try to express how they feel related to whatever has caused the trauma or the grief. And I'm relating sort of to grief and death. Was that the question, or was it trauma?
That was certainly part of it, but yeah, any unexpected suffering.
Yeah. Our girls were just a year apart in school, and in their high school, I believe we counted 9 of their friends died. Some by suicide, some by accident. And so there was a lot of us just watching, being available to listen, listening to them cry, which they needed to do. I remember, well, the thing about grief is it will hit you usually at times when you wish it wouldn't, but you don't get to decide that usually. So I would just say if there's a big principle, it's you can't force it and you can't control it. So you got to give room for it. And man, sometimes bringing them to a Christian counselor is very important. To let them maybe have a safe place that, for whatever reason, at home, with parents they don't feel that, or we don't know how to have the tools to help them in a certain way. So I'd be very in favor, of that as well.
Depending on the age of your child, if you're having a moment, we want to shield our kids. We don't want to overburden our kids, right? Age appropriateness is so important. You don't want to give your child more to carry than their synapses have developed. You do damage that way. So when we've had difficult times in our ministry, when we've had relational conflict, deep relational conflict with someone somehow, or in grief in these times. Even Lane, his little friend, was a go-kart racer.
At 12 years old.
At 12 years old, his go-kart flipped over and killed him. How does that happen? So to be able to identify, part of our job as parents, help them learn what emotion is and name them, and to be able to say, oh, mommy's irritable right now. I'm irritable right now, and it's because I'm just so sad about what happened to KJ, and I'm just this is just grief, and I'm sorry I'm so grumpy. Do you ever feel grumpy and wonder if it might be connected to KJ dying because you miss him, or you help them that way? I hope that makes sense what I'm trying to say.
This is a different question. I do think at some point today, I hope we also just talk about emotion, because I'm kind of letting grief take its own path. I'm not saying that every emotion should lead us all the time. We need to I believe we need to identify and understand what our emotion is, and even some of the soul care training I've been doing is to recognize it in an interview, but then you don't let it control you necessarily, or I yelled at this person because I was angry, so it must be okay because no, it's not okay to lose control, but it is healthy to know what the emotion is, but then how we respond to it matters as well. So I'm separating that from grief, which involves emotion, but is a deeper thing, maybe I would say it that way.
This is kind of connected to some of the other stuff you've talked about. I'm thinking about like the pop music is candy, and this is a ways off for a lot of us, but I'm just thinking, I work with a lot of teenagers, and like culture is loud, age of information. How did you guys navigate like letting your kids being in the world but not of the world, and protecting them, age appropriateness? And nowadays, it's even more heightened with smartphones, social media. How would you guys speak into preparing for that as parents? Or even lost friends?
There's a lot of aspects. First thought that I have is, have you all read The Anxious Generation by Haidt? You know what I'm talking about? I would recommend that book. They have done such a good job. It's not a Christian book, but they've done such good research on basically what the iPhone has done. And they would recommend that your child doesn't have a smartphone until freshman in high school. That was what we followed as well, but there weren't even smartphones yet. But
Because our high school was so big
yeah,
that when you went to pick them up, you didn't know where they were.
they could be blocks away. So that's why we did it back then. But
Where are you?
so I would go as late as you can before you give them their own phone. But then even if you did it as a freshman, you've got that. We very much wanted them to learn to be in the world, but not of the world. So first of all, that was there. What are some of the hows? Do you remember what we did?
One of the things that we said, and this is older, but we said, let us be the bad guy. And so anything, blame it on us. Make us look like the meanest people that ever were. And we did that. So
When their friends wanted
when their
them
friends
to.
wanted them to do X, Y, or Z, and we said, no, it's not appropriate. Harry Potter, y'all all love Harry Potter. One of my kids, when Harry Potter first came out, I read Harry Potter. It's a great book, great movie, all that stuff. But there's a worldview in it, right? That is definitely not of God. And so part of it for me was when my kid could read chapter books when she was 6 years old. The school librarian hands her Harry Potter and says, read this, you'll love it. And she said, my mom won't let me. And then I had to have a conversation with the librarian and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, this is, do y'all know who Corrie ten Boom is? Do y'all know who that is? Okay. Corrie ten Boom in her book tells it, whatever her book was called, which, Hiding Place.
The hiding place, yeah.
She talks about, she asked her dad, what is sex, one time when her kid was little. And her dad said, when we take a trip, do I make you carry your heavy suitcase or do I make you carry the little suitcase? And she says, the little suitcase. And he says, it would be mean for me to make you take the heavy one, right? And she says, yes. And he said, same is true with sex. It is too big of a suitcase for you to carry now. I'll let you carry it when you're big enough. And that principle became very important to me in what we allowed our kids to be exposed to or carry. We want it to be not letting them overcarry or undercarry. So we had things, the dating thing, they weren't allowed to go steady or anything like that until they were 16, whatever they called it, date, I guess. And even then we said, we want you to be in groups and not alone because we're aware of the sexual climate that we live in, right? They did not love that at the time. We said, it's normal for you to have a crush on a boy. It's normal for you to have a crush on a girl. That's good. God made your body. This is great. But we're just not going to do this dating relationship thing. They have all three of them come to us as adults and thanked us for that. They believe we protected them from a lot. Now, all their kids knew that. We tried to make our house fun, and it turns out we ended up being the Kool-Aid house.
I don't remember, by the way, that being that hard of a thing with our girls especially. They weren't that anxious to start dating, thankfully. So they understood the principle of that.
But Lane was handsome.
Yeah.
And girls threw themselves at him.
They did, that's true. And I was just in such admiration of my son. I was like, I always wanted to be like that. Like, what's that like? We were really pretty protective of information when they were young, when they were home, when they were in grade school, and we didn't care. We didn't care if people looked at us like we were, because we really were just trying to protect them. But then, little by little, and I'm sure they were exposed to more than we would know, because that's the way it is with kids. But
We did not watch R-rated movies in our home. We didn't have them in our home. Okay, and some of that has to do with time. Y'all have streaming services, so fix them so your kids can't accidentally
yeah,
see.
just so that stuff they
Fix-
just don't need to see, they just don't need to be exposed to. And we're not talking just about the sex stuff, but the death and all the
Even
violence
the
and stuff.
attitudes of
Yeah.
Nickelodeon and Disney Channel. Praise God, we were poor and we couldn't even afford cable TV. So we only got Mr. Rogers and Barney and Sesame Street. And Arthur. And, that's what our kids could watch other than things that we provided.
We were very sensitive to snarky, sarcastic attitudes in TV and stuff. And we just, because it's so contagious. It's caught so easy. So we really watched against that kind of thing for when they're little.
I'm curious what kind of value or weight you guys put on, looking back when you guys had young kids, the relationship between your kids and your parents. I feel like a lot of us have moved from where we grew up, so our parents aren't around, at least locally. I'm just curious what type of value and weight you put on either trying to be around them a lot or like we're in our own place. We get to see them a handful of times a year. I feel like, as you guys have said, we have a really special thing here with all of our friends who are in similar seasons of us with young kids. So it's a unique experience that a lot of us don't know, like outside of this. And so, just curious how you guys have navigated that. If you were far from your family.
Yeah, we were 2,000 miles away from both of our families. So it worked out that we were usually able to see them once a year, maybe twice a year. We would try to go there, and sometimes they could come to us once. So our kids grew up seeing them that often. But we could call, and now we have, later we have FaceTime and all that kind of stuff. But they grew up respecting and their grandparents and loving them, and it's been a place where both we taught them to honor and love their grandparents, and of course their grandparents for the most part showed love to them. But it also was a place where Luke 18 talks about, where basically Jesus says, "You follow me, you will have mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers." We saw the Lord do that. We saw other people who also played grandparent roles, or brother or sister or aunt or uncle roles. And so both especially Lane sees it now, but the girls, even in high school, they could see the blessing of both. And thankful for our family. I don't know, I don't know that they ever felt robbed by not being with them, though it would have been great, but just the way the Lord called us.
Family is family. The sweet thing about only getting to see them a couple of times a year is that time was so intensely I love you kind of stuff, if that makes sense. It's important for you to understand the call of God on your life. When you understand that God has called you here for this time, when we remember everything we know to be true about God, that He is everywhere, that He's omniscient, that He is omnipresent, that He is good, then when He called you here, you didn't know how many kids you would have here. You didn't know that He knew. And so if I can trust Him with my call, I can trust Him. He didn't go, "Oh, wait a minute, I forgot about the grandparents." And what we have seen in our lives, and not just in our lives, but in the lives of the people that we have been friends and comrades and friends in ministry, is that the Lord takes care of His people, including His children. Now, will they have the exact same relationship of the kid who toddles across the farm to the grandparents? Oh, that's so sweet, and I would love that. Sure, who wouldn't? But the Lord knows. And so living into call, whether you are full-time ministry or full-time bread baker or doctor or whatever you are, living into your call will gird you.
And I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but I want to say it's not an unusual thing in Scripture for the Lord to call people away from their family. That's not strange if you look at Scripture. And so I think what we're saying is our commitment to the Lord's call on our life must always take precedence to everything else and comfort. Now, there may be times to go back and be with family, but as far as priority, what you ask about, it's really worked out well. I mean, there were some things we were glad we were far away from. Family dynamics.
I'm gonna ask one more question, kind of in the same line of thinking, and then we'll break for lunch. Some people ask some questions in the forum about, like, in our church, we're all kind of peers. There's like a longing for mentors, and so you mentioned potentially having new grandparents and new aunts and uncles. And I'm just curious what you think about that. Like, what are the pros and cons of being in our church, just with peers alongside us?
Way more pros than cons, I would say. I want to say, I don't care what church you're in, it always seems like if we were in some other church, it would be so much better. And not true. Wherever you go, there's just good and bad. There's just the way it's going to be. What you have makes it hard for me to say, for you to ever give that up. And I think you can have mentors and aunts and uncles I meant, that's you, but other grandparents, you can have those, and you don't have to go to another church to get to do that. And it's something to ask the Lord for. He can bring them. Sometimes it's neighbors, sometimes not, but you'll be amazed at who He brings across your path. And for us, sometimes they haven't even lived in our town, but I mean, one of the joys is just the people we've met in ministry. And I have so many people in my life now that are still further down the road than me now, as old as we are now, that the Lord has brought across our paths, and who would have ever dreamed? So I would just say ask the Lord for that.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's because you're in a particular church. You're going to have a deficit somewhere, no matter where you are.
You might consider asking the Lord to bring somebody, some old folks. I would also say that if your family is, Brian is a very great example of this. Brian has generously shared his parents with all of Resonate. There are many, many people who think of your parents as parental figures, right? Share your parents. Bring them. Invite them in. If they can come for a week or two, if there's 12 of you and each one of you had somebody for a month, I mean, once a month, there's 12 sets of people. Invite them in and tell them. Invite them, right? Hey, Mom, Dad, when you're here, would it be okay if I had some friends over and they could just ask you some questions? Your folks would freak out with joy about that. So just, and they would say, well, I don't have anything special to say.
Yeah, that's what
And you say, I know, but would that be okay? So share. In the New Testament church, everything was in common. So share your mentors.